Welcome everyone to the February 23rd City Council work session. Welcome to everyone here and at home and all of our guests. So our item of today is a very important one to us. It's the West Eugene MX update. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And today we will have LTD provide a presentation for us, and then, of course, staff as well as LTD staff are available for questions for today. So, Mark, I don't know who's your...
Well, I can talk.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for taking time to have us present on this important topic. We'll look forward to a short presentation and answering questions. I want to start by letting you know that many of us, both on the staff and on the board at LTD, were probably as surprised as you were when you read the headline. I can't remember what day it was. Thursday. Because there was some kind of a disconnect there. After the joint LPAC meeting, the staff at LTD was concerned that there were two LPAs going forward, and that was a result of the joint LPAC meeting, and wanted to make sure that that everyone realizes that we've got to get it narrowed down to one if there's going to be a build alternative. And they started talking about ways to make it clearer, help people understand, present more facts that would help people come to a single decision as opposed to the two alternatives that were presented. And as a result, at the board meeting, which was the night after the joint LPAC meeting, I believe, asked that the LTD board give them staff some response to a proposal that they had. And the proposal, in order to provide this additional information, was going to stretch out the process a little bit. And so we went, there were only four board members that night there. Some were out of town and unable to attend. And so we went member to member and just gave them responses. And you might recall that there wasn't a unanimous input by the board. There was diversity on the board in their positions. And in any case, there was no official board action taken. There was no board vote taken. It was just a matter of sort of an informal, around-the-table conversation. I recall specifically one of my comments being that whatever we do, we need to make sure that it's consistent with what the City Council wants to do in terms of your actions. And so I want to start out by letting you know that the LTD board has no intention or we have no business trying to tell you when you're going to do something. So I want to make that clear right from the very beginning. It's not our job to set your time frame. And the second thing was I wanted to emphasize that there was no official board action taken. It was simply a matter of getting some board input to a staff proposal. So that aside, Tom has about 10, 12 minutes worth of information to present that will hopefully help move the process along, and then we'll be around for questions.
So I'm going to move this forward. First thing I want to do is talk about the remaining tasks that we have before we would go to construction, just so you understand kind of how this process works. And in particular, we're going to talk about the Small Starts grant application process, so you get a sense of how the Federal Transit Administration looks at applications like ours. And then we're going to talk about completing the environmental process. To start with, just recapping the process to date, kind of trying to summarize it in a sentence over the last 3.5 years of effort. But really what we were about is focusing on a project design concepts that balance the operational needs that we have for bus rapid transit and the intent to minimize negative impacts while still meeting the project's purpose and need. And the way we did that was there were, some of you were involved in those, numerous public design charrettes, a range of design refinement that we went through, then further a series of one-on-one meetings with adjacent property owners, and then further design refinement leading to the mitigation plans that we have today. So last Monday, the Joint LPA Committee made a recommendation and basically narrowed all the work that we've done down to two build alternatives and the no-build alternative. And I've just recapped the essence of the language there from the motion. And what we can conclude from the analysis that we've done to date is that both build alternatives have, in the analysis completed, been demonstrated to provide significant improvements compared to the no-build alternative. We have received a variety of advice, positions, and recommendations from various groups, and I would turn your attention to this table that has a summary of those efforts.
Tom, and may I point out, excuse me for interrupting, that there is an error on the LTD-MX Steering Committee summary.
Okay.
It was 13th and 11th, and to move no build, we couldn't get enough people to get the TSM to move forward.
You're right. I'm sorry. That's correct.
There's no buildings to the TSM.
So that should read 13th, 11th, and no bill.
So what do the X's mean?
Oh, that means that we basically categorize them as to whether they were advocating just building, like several of the University of Oregon groups just said we need to build the West Eugene MX. So the general schedule of these remaining tasks, again, kind of referring to what Mike was alluding to, the March decision framework is still preferred, but we feel that if there was more time, we could go as late as June if you needed to sort out further the differences between the 6th, 7th, and 13th alternatives. The small starts application is due mid to late August, and then completion of the environmental process can occur as late as November 2011. As I point out there at the top, it's likely to entail overlapping and concurrent processes to meet these things. So our interest is getting things moving as quickly as possible. So the next part of my presentation is going to be reviewing the 6th, 7th, and 13th, 11th alternatives. And I want to start with talking about a little bit of background on the Small Starts grant submittal. To the extent that we want to choose a locally preferred alternative that's competitive for federal funds, it's worth considering, as we make this decision, the criteria that they use. And those are listed there: cost effectiveness, economic development and land use, and local financial commitment. And I'm going to go step through each of those and provide you with some of the measures from the two alternatives. So cost effectiveness is essentially looking at elements of the capital costs, the operating costs, transit ridership, and then transit travel time. In essence, what happens when the FTA looks at this is they'll look at the transit travel time saved relative to a baseline, could be no build, relative to the capital and operating costs. So just to run through things quickly, the capital costs right now with the mitigation plans that we've done, basically the motion that the Joint LPA Committee put forth, we have 13th, 11th at $76.6 million and 6th, 7th at $86.3 million. From an operating cost standpoint, the system-wide cost per boarding relative to no build, the 13th and 11th and 6th, 7th are lower. They're about 4 cents difference.
Pardon me, Tom. Cost per boarding as compared to cost per trip. There was some confusion about that in the past.
Right. It's this calculation is cost per boarding, but the analysis that we've done coming out of the model presents us with ridership in terms of trips. So
cost per board. There may be 3 boardings or 2 boardings per trip.
Right.
Or,
exactly.
Okay.
That makes it look like a significant difference. It's not.
The increase in passenger trips now compared to no build, 548,000 for 13th, 11th, 620,000 for 6th, 7th, 11th. And of course, that's on a baseline of about 14 million passenger trips for the system as a whole. Transit travel time, and I'm also going to talk about auto travel time here as well. Compared to no build, you can see for transit travel time, no build, and this is a round trip from our station to Commerce and back to our station, is 56.1 minutes. With the 13th, 11th, it's 29.9 minutes. And with the 6th, 7th, it's four more minutes, or 33.9. What's interesting is that as part of our project, again, as I've explained before with respect to the BAT lanes that we have proposed on the corridor, those BAT lanes tend to pull, well, they take our buses out of the through traffic, but they also tend to pull the right turning cars that might be turning at intersections or at driveways out of that through traffic as well. And so as a result, you have a slight benefit in auto travel time over no build of about, close to 4 minutes with 13th and 11th, and just less than a minute for 6th, 7th.
And Tom, one more clarification. These numbers are all system-wide?
These numbers are for the travel time on that round
corridor.
trip from the station to Commerce and back.
Okay, but the two previous slides were system-wide?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll try and keep that in mind as we move forward. Another look here, one of the reasons that we're, again, able to obtain those cost savings is related to the exclusive and BAT lanes that we have. And you can see both alternatives have about 70% of the corridor in either exclusive lanes, which is only on 13th, or the business access transit lanes. And that compares well to our existing service, which on both Franklin and Gateway average about 60 to 65%. So that was cost effectiveness. Economic development and land use is a relatively new criterion that FDA has introduced to the evaluation. And they look at a range of things. Quantitatively, they look at the population and employment levels and densities for the region as a whole, the corridor being proposed, and the station locations themselves. And one thing you can gather from this, again, this is to enable FTA to judge applications coming in from all sizes of regions, all types of systems. And basically, I left this part out, but essentially for all of these criteria, FTA uses a kind of a 5-level ranking: high, medium, low, and low. And you need to average basically a medium ranking in order to proceed into project development. So from an economic development and land use standpoint, that criterion, generally speaking, the high rankings are going to be seen in the larger urban areas, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Chicago, L.A., those types, that level of, so even Portland, the best they get is medium to medium high, and that's entirely because of this quantification of the scale of the project. Other considerations they have: existing land use, looking at major developments along the corridor, transit-oriented infrastructure, sidewalks, street connectivity, bike facilities, programs such as our Group Pass program that support transit use. And then they look at future land use plans, policies and plans. Efforts like the Walnut Station work is considered to be a positive thing for us to note in an application like this, because it says that we're kind of looking at trying to accomplish those types of things. I would say, too, that there's been some discussion about the relationship between this project and Envision Eugene. I guess my conclusion would be that the Envision Eugene effort, as it relates to MX, probably speaks more to the need to build the system as to identifying any specific alignment in this process. So just thought I'd make that comment. So talking about just the population and employment, I've used these slides before. You can see kind of over time, 1990 through the estimated or forecast 2031 comparison for the Franklin and Gateway corridors, as well as the two alignments, 6th, 7th, and 13th, 11th. And you can see that both the build alternatives compare favorably with our other MX corridors. That was population, and wait for it. There we go. Employment. And I think I probably presented this before, but interestingly, you can see the Gateway employment has increased dramatically since 1990, but still the other corridors have a higher level of employment.
Tom, pardon me for another clarification on the population comparison. How wide is that? How far does that actually go out from
That's
the route?
looking at a buffer around the corridor of about a half a mile.
Half a mile on either side?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So looking at some of the impacts of the two alignments, property acquisitions, and these are parcels impacted. For 13th, 11th, we've got 90, and for 6th, 7th, we've got 121 properties that would have some portion that we'd need to acquire for the project. The green bar there indicates there are, just by virtue of the way the tax lots are laid out, that one business might have 2 or 3 tax lots, and so this was an attempt to just show you that kind of the consolidation of those acquisitions. So those green bars represent the businesses that would be affected. On-street parking spaces removed. For the 13th, 11th, we've got 120. For 6th, 7th, we've got about 60. Trees and landscape trees potentially removed. For 13th, 11th, we've got 60 street trees, about 40 landscape trees. On 6th, 7th, we've got about 100 street trees and about 38 landscape trees. A question was asked with respect to the construction-related job creation, and that bullet there I've taken from an email I got from ODOT, who pulled this number from their economic plan. Basically, in 2009, $1 million spent on construction of commercial and institutional buildings. Institutional is where we feel we would fit. We create about 9.5 direct jobs, 6.5 indirect jobs, for a total of 16 during the course of construction. So just to give you a sense of scale, the $80 to $90 million project would generate about 1,300 to 1,400 jobs. So that was the economic development and land use criteria.
Cool.
You might want to hold
Here you go. That was for you.
Oh, thank you very much.
So it's a good thing for those cat-like reflexes.
Wake up. I couldn't have planned it. Sorry, Mike. I didn't
That's
mean to
all
do it
right.
on
Hey,
purpose.
it barely got me. I'm really quick.
That was pretty quick.
Wake everybody up.
You need to spill water on Mike more often.
Yeah. How'd I do, Andy? Is that pretty good kind of athletic reflex sort of thing there? All right.
Oh, you.
I got a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I did too.
Just keep it away from the computer, though.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Okay.
I guess it's an intermission.
It's intermission.
We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Free time for swabbing the deck.
This is a bipartisan cleaning up
There we
here.
go. It's a group effort.
There you go.
Yeah, I handed her an extra. Oh, okay.
Push it toward the crack in the table.
I guess
Oh,
Mike might do that.
I'm sure the cleaning staff would like that. You get a trash can? Comedy relief, Mayor.
Teamwork.
Thanks, sir.
We're almost done.
Nice polish while we're at it here. Yeah. Missed a spot over there.
Sure your adapter's dried off.
Yeah.
Just keep this here.
Thank you. That would be a bad short.
Yeah, that could make sparks. Okay.
Thanks, sir. Got it? I think we are.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, we'll transition to transit.
So here's some extra copies
Oh,
of the presentation.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All
Go ahead
right.
and put that here.
So the last major criterion that Small Starts has is called local financial commitment, and that's made up of a consideration of the level of local share of capital costs. Obviously, the more local share you can bring to a project, the more attractive it is to FTA. What they call the strength of the capital funding plan and the strength of the operating plan. And just to explain a little bit more about those, the strength of the capital funding plan is looking at, what the plan is for local share, what the, if some of you have heard the term financial constraint used in the regional planning context, FTA uses the same principle of reasonably expected to be available in terms of capital funding. And so that's how they would judge the strength of the capital funding. Do we have evidence that we've been successful in getting this kind of funding before? And the answer would be yes. The strength of the operating plan is looking at a number of things related to the funding of the operation. In essence, they have a threshold that looks at whether the proposed project would add more than 5% to the overall operating costs of the district. Just to give you a sense of that, we come in closer to 2.5% to 3% with the addition of this. So the conclusion with respect to the financial commitment, we don't have any graphs here, but either of the build alternatives can be shown to be financially feasible and meet the Small Starts criterion. And with respect to finance, though, I'd note 6/7 has about $10 million more in capital cost, longer travel times, and less than 1% more ridership system-wide. The 6/7 alternative also costs 28% more in opening year operating costs than 13th, and that represents an opportunity cost. These funds can be used for additional service on other parts of the system.
Missed all the fun, Alan.
Will that go down in infamy, like having food at each other?
A little bit.
Okay, ready for,
Yeah. We're wrap up again. I think that's an overview of what we've done to date, and welcome any discussion or questions.
thank you very much. So what I'd like to do as we begin this conversation, I'll make a couple comments. I want to actually, because Chris and Andrea and I were on the joint LPA committee, I want to give each of them a chance to say something if they would like to do that. And so I'm just going to say that I appreciate having had a chance to really see the extensive efforts that have been made on the part of LTD around this, and the joint LPA committee saw the same things that you just saw and kind of thought that you've been hearing so much about both options that it would be worth bringing both of those for you to have to be able to question and ask about. On my part, I don't have any doubt that I want us to do one of the build options, and I don't have any doubt that I would like us to do it sooner rather than later. And I think The 13th one, to me, they've been pretty clear about the technical merits and the cost merits, and the only thing that I would say about that is that we have sort of the job of looking at that and then looking at the political landscape at the same time, and really trying to understand where community support is. So we have to look at not only the cost merits and the technical, but where the community is, and we have to also have a project that's viable. So we have all those responsibilities, and I guess the only other comment I'll make right now is that for me, and I think you saw that up in this presentation, but for me, it's not transit versus everything else. It's transit as part of everything else. That when we get this done, as in the rest of the community, we want to have good bike options, good pedestrian options, good car options, and good transit options. And if they're all good, people will make good choices, and and our community will move forward in the way that we all want to have it move. So that's sort of where I am. And I'm going to turn to Andrea. Did you have anything you wanted to?
Well, I just would, thank you, Mayor. I would just echo what you said about the opportunity to work with and listen to other members of the MPC and LTD were a part of this, and I thought that was pretty good input. Sonny Chickering did a pretty good job of asking some pretty technical questions, which, he would as a person from ODOT. And I just want to say that I appreciate the efforts that LTD has been putting themselves through, the paces that they've been putting themselves through, trying to answer questions from the community. And I also want to make a decision sooner than later. And that's about it.
Yes.
I also want to thank LTD for their forbearance and their willingness to be flexible. I feel a certain amount of culpability or responsibility as you think about it. If you look at all of the options on here, you'll see that the LPA committee is the only one that keeps 6/7 on the map. And part of the reason for doing that was a lot of my interest in making sure that when something comes to the city council, it can come in the full capability being discussed in terms of land use. We are in the middle of a very significant consideration of what the land use will be for that part of town and how that relates to what transportation and other things would be. And I think to limit it before we've even had a chance to put the two together may not give us the best conversation we want to have. So I agree. We want to try to get to a choice as soon as possible, but I didn't feel we were ready to go into the land use conversation without bringing as many options as possible. And I appreciate LTD kind of being willing to go with us on that, and I think that really was a great thing on their part. I don't want to drag this out longer than it needs to be. I don't want to short-circuit it. And so I think we've got, in my estimation, a really good starting point for the conversation. We've got a couple of corridors we can look at to try to narrow it down, but in the context of land use. To me, that was really the thing that's driven a lot of my thought here is, I understand the operating costs and the boardings and all the technical aspects, but we have to keep it linked to land use. And the ability to use land use to arrive at a corridor, I think, is doing it in the right order. And so I appreciate the willingness to leave 6th and 7th still on the table, so that we can at least talk about whether or not to eliminate it or another option, but based on its relationship to what we believe the land use will be. And I appreciated the picture that was on here where you talked about that is actually now one of the criteria, not only current land use, but future land use. So that's tying into what are now the new criteria, or at least the recognized criteria for considering this. So I'm feeling much better about where we are in terms of the conversation we can have on it versus where we would if we had limited ourselves, I think, a little bit too early. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate LTD being willing to be flexible on that.
Thanks. Pat, you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, thanks for pointing that out, the 6th, 7th option, and why that came back under the table, being a land use issue. I understand that a little more clearly now. So, and thank you, Mike, for explaining the headlines that morning that I woke up. Sorry. And it was a great lesson for me, is have a drink of coffee or tea and sit down and take a few breaths before you respond. So
Don't spill it.
And don't spill the
Don't
water.
spill it.
Whatever you do.
Water.
He didn't say water.
But I do, just one question regarding the presentation. On, I think it's about slide 15, the number of street trees and landscape trees potentially removed.
Yes.
Seems like a lot, either way. But can you comment on what what are you doing to replace the trees? Are you replacing those trees with any numbers?
Generally, on our first two projects, we've replaced more trees than we've taken, so that would be our commitment to
Okay,
this.
just, you have numbers on that, or just you do, as a rule, you,
I could get numbers.
okay, I don't need them right now, but
Ballpark?
Well, we would work with the forester, the urban forester, the cities, to plant more trees where it was appropriate for issues, excuse me, thank you, where it was appropriate for them to be, considering safety and sight lines and all of that stuff. But, you know, trees are relatively expensive in the full context of this project. And so our idea, if you look at what was done on the landscaping on the Pioneer Parkway, you know, we put in quite a bit of landscaping, not just trees, but also other kinds of vegetation to improve the corridor site. So we would have to work with the city, but we would do that.
But to answer your question, I mean, just going off of what I recall for the Gateway project, there was something like over 300 trees that we had to remove, so we planted more than that.
more than 300.
On the project.
Okay. And I saw one schematic, I guess, of the 13th Avenue route where there were some trees in front of the fairgrounds.
Extension.
That were kind of stunted trees, or sweet gums, I guess is what they
Sweet
are.
gums that have been trimmed to stay under the...
that are not really handsome trees by any means. But those would be replaced by something maybe more appropriate, is that?
Yeah, in fact, those aren't, we designed around those trees, given some of the feedback we'd had from the neighborhood, but it actually introduced a concept that we're looking at. You know, if we proceeded with 13th, we'd look at actually the concept of running both MX lanes on the south side of the power poles. Would mean we'd have to acquire those trees, but you'd increase the buffer between the neighborhood and the MX line that way. So they're trade-offs.
And understanding that young trees, Betty and I talked about this years ago. Young trees don't exactly replace mature trees. You did this. But they grow. So, okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I've got George and then Mike.
I do have one question on the PowerPoint presentation on the property acquisitions, where it says the 13th, 11th, there's 90 total acquisitions and 54 number of individual uses. Is that a total of 154 affected properties, or is that 54 drawn out of that 90?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
It's a consolidation of the individual parcels into ownership.
And this is the entire parcel that's going to be acquired, not just a part of it?
No, it's partial. It's all partial
Okay, so
acquisition.
that's the, okay, I got it. It's total acquisitions, not total acquisition.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. All right.
Total. What?
I understand.
It's the pronunciation of it.
And then the other thing is, I'm glad that
No, you haven't had your hand up
the
yet.
joint LPA was able to keep the 6/7 alternative on the table. As a member of the EMX steering committee, when this was presented to us, I was of the opinion that we were in a position where we were to recommend just one. And that's why I said of the alternatives that we had to choose from, that the one we chose I felt was the best one, and I wanted to move the TSM and the no-build forward. So I'm glad that 6/7 is still on the table, because since that meeting, I've heard from a number of people that have come up with various reasons, and I'm sure they've contacted you or you've been in contact with them, why the 6/7 is still a real viable option. So I guess it's just now a matter of more input on which direction and how that's going to impact the community and what, you know, what the overall impact that's going to create. So we got a little bit more to look at.
Mike, and then Betty, and then George Brown.
Thank you. Two questions. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I guess the first question I would be is the council precluded, if for whatever reason we chose to, from choosing the TSM option to recommend?
Well, I would respond by saying that, again, the TSM option is intended to provide analysis, basically, of what we would do with a less capital-intensive effort to improve. the project. TSM is not an MX corridor, obviously, so from our standpoint, TSM would be basically no build.
Yeah.
I think you'd be selecting essentially a no-build on a BRT route, but looking for enhancements in the current bus system.
Right.
Right, and so,
That would
again,
be-
my question is that still a choice that this council could make as a recommendation?
Council can definitely do no build as a decision, yes.
Secondly, as I understand it, the portion of the project, and for lack of specificity, I'm just going to say the $30 million state portion of the project is lottery-backed bonds. Do I have that right?
Yes.
On Friday, the state treasurer issued a statement about the state's indebtedness. And the state committee that did work on that, saying essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the state's credit card is maxed out. One of the things that they said was that they would recommend putting on hold several projects that are in the FY11-13 cycle, and that they plan to do some work, hopefully, with the legislature to free up some money with regard to lottery-backed stuff, but they weren't sure in then those following out years what that left us with in terms of borrowing capacity because of the state's lack of, because of the jeopardy to our bond rating and the costs of borrowing. So I guess I don't really need an answer today, but I would like to have an answer back about the state's financial condition and how that may affect the lottery-backed bond portion of the financing for this project.
Looks like Tom can answer something.
Yeah, I can give you kind of a quick overview. Again, our strategy with respect to the legislature was to try and achieve a total of $30 million over 3 sessions.
Okay.
Last session, we got 1.6 million. This year, our request was for 8.4 million, and then the other 20 would be in the third session.
I see.
So there is certainly some flexibility that we have there to adapt to whatever condition the legislature finds itself in. I think we would, obviously then be asking for the rest the next session.
Okay. Thank you.
Betty?
Okay, taking up where Mike left off, could that 30 million, that theoretical 30 million, could that be used for schools?
My understanding of the lottery fund program is that they have basically taken the lottery funds and are funding various programs with it, including schools, infrastructure, those types of things. The legislature could certainly choose to spend that money.
That's what I was thinking. Which brings me to my my big question. On the slide it said that the additional money saved by the 11th, 13th option could be used for additional services.
That's correct.
And I thought we were informed that the money you're spending for MX couldn't be used to improve other services.
This is, that references to our operating costs, not our capital costs. MX capital funds can't be used for operations, but our operating costs for MX are certainly able to be used on others.
And is it true, I've been listening to things for years now from lots of people, but is it true that the MX costs more to operate than the other buses?
No, if you look at the cost per ride or per boarding, it's actually a lot more efficient.
And another question, 1,300 to 1,400 jobs. Were there that many jobs on the other two projects?
The other two projects were less in terms of capital costs. So the first one was 24.
Weren't that many jobs.
Right.
And where do those people go after they do these temporary jobs?
Well,
Are
one way
there
to
people who
look at
be
it
brought
is...
into the community to do them, or?
No, I mean, a lot of the labor is local, and a lot of those people are making their careers and livelihood in construction. So if it's not our job, it's the arena, or it's the I-5 project, or there's construction work that's going on. So we're just contributing that many jobs to the mix.
All construction jobs.
Contractors.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions about that. I have lots of questions about the other service and all the other routes, but that's a different matter.
Okay, George Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple questions about, well, I want to thank Mike for asking about TSM. I'd like to see that advance somehow formally, along with no build, even if it's just a pro forma advancement, because I think it's a good option. I've got a couple questions about, the value of 11th, 13th over 6th, 7th. I see most people favor 11th, 13th, but to me that doesn't make any sense. If you're looking to extend this service to the maximum amount of employment centers or places where people shop, it seems like 6th and 7th is just like immediately jumps out. There's businesses at places where people work on both sides of each street. If you go down 13th from Chambers to Lawrence, there's nothing. It's like a desert of businesses. There's no employment, or very little, really, some at the fairgrounds, I suppose at a couple of the churches. But there's just no businesses, and it's like, I don't understand why that would be considered a superior route, and then that's just an observation, I guess. That's not really a question. But my question would be on page 11 of this graph here, where it shows corridor employment comparison. And, I'm looking at the 6th, 7th, and 11th, 13th, 11th. So is the 6th, 7th, is that 6th, 7th, and then all the way out 11th?
6th, 7th, 11th.
That's the total, okay. All right, and then 13th and 11th is that total also, okay. And you actually counted the number of existing businesses? Because it seems like it's just a very short gap. And if you look, I'll just go back to my original point. If you go down 13th from Chambers to wherever you would turn back to Eugene Station, there's nothing. Whereas on 6th and 7th, there's an enormous amount of businesses on both sides. I think it just looks a little deceptive to me is all.
That looks bigger. Draw the line right there, though. Because from there down is the same no matter what.
Okay.
More questions, George?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right, Alan?
So just follow, how did you create that graph? What was the input?
The input is the employment files that we get periodically, so 2009, 2000, and 2006 from the state. We geocode those so we know how many employees are at various addresses, and then they're summed up into analysis zones.
So you counted them.
Yeah.
I too, with the mayor, am in favor of a build option. I think sooner than later. I think because of the congestion and the travel times and the cars and climate change and all of the plans that we have for the last 2 decades have been about creating choices for people for alternative modes of transportation, whether that be bike, ped, or transit, or automobiles. And in order to do that, we need to make investments into these things to give people the choices. If we don't make the investments, they don't get the choice. So we can't make those good community beneficial impacts if we don't make these choices. So to me, this really is an investment in the future, in our future, in the future of Eugene, and especially in creating those choices and with all those ancillary benefits. I'm not buying the Tea Party's line that this is wasteful spending. I think this is clearly an investment in Eugene and this community and in our well-being and into our, especially our future for our children. So that's where I'm at. I'm kind of interested in why all these groups chose West 11th as opposed to 6th and 7th. I understand Jefferson West Side, if that makes sense to me.
Well, obviously each group has its own personality, but consideration of the data is what basically what you saw in the presentation here, and the way the mayor put it, the technical merits of 13th.
Yeah, I guess, you know, the ones that concern me are the fact that increase in capital costs and operating costs. It costs $10 million more to do 6th and 7th, and it costs $700,000 a year more to operate in that corridor. Those are not insubstantial amounts of money. The other question I had is, a lot of people say to me, I see all these buses with nobody in them, and maybe Mark's best person to answer this question, but I see all these buses with nobody in them, and why not use a bunch of these smaller buses? And so how does that relate to operating on cost impacts? I mean, there's a lot of people all of a sudden in the last couple of months have become mass transit experts by taking Mass Transit 101 through this MX process, but
to do it. I'll try to use an analogy here. Let's say Exes comes and drops 3 cubic yards of Barco mulch in your yard, and you need to move that by wheelbarrow around. You got to get it from that spot out to somewhere else. I've done it before. I always get the biggest wheelbarrow I can use, even though some places I might go to a part of the yard where I only need half a wheelbarrow full, and other parts I need to have probably a double wheelbarrow, but that's the only size I have. So you basically build your system for the capacity that you need to carry people around through that system. The smaller the vehicles that you have, the more vehicles you need to have to carry all those passengers when you're at peak times. So, you know, in the morning peak and then the afternoon peak, if you have a whole bunch of small vehicles where one big large bus, or the 40-foot, which is the standard size, or even those 60-foot articulated that you see, you know, you could use one articulated bus. You might have to use 3 smaller buses to carry the same amount of people. For us, the major cost really of running equipment, of running the buses, is the labor costs, the driver and the mechanic associated with maintaining that vehicle, and the supervisors you need to have out in the systems to keep track of all of that. So for us, it makes more sense economically and efficiently to have larger buses because it can carry more people. You can use them in more areas. We do, like, remember the Breeze was, we had a 30-foot bus? Or 22. We started with 22. They weren't big enough. We went to 30. Now we have very few places that we can use that 30-foot bus kind of on a whole day. We can put it out during midday, but then we have to bring it back, change out drivers, and do again. So when people suggest you could use smaller vehicles, they might be more attractive in a neighborhood, but if it takes one vehicle to carry, 45 people and 2 to carry that same number, it's much more economical to have the larger vehicles and not the smaller ones. And we're at financial capacity now, as you know. We can't afford to put any more drivers and vehicles out.
So 80% of your operating cost is around the labor, so changing the bus doesn't affect 80% of it. Only, 6% of your cost is actually fuel, and smaller buses actually only have a modest increase in fuel efficiency. And say if it were increased 10%, you get, a 0.5% decrease in cost?
Yeah, and that might work, except if you need to put 2 small buses out to the one bus, then you lose all the efficiency from the fuel, and you have the extra cost of that extra driver. Right. So.
And not to mention the life cycle cost of a big bus versus a small bus.
Yeah, small buses, you can maybe get 150,000 miles out of them, maybe 200 if you're lucky. Big buses, you can get 800,000 miles out of them. So when you add them up, you're going to have to buy 3 or more small buses for the same life cycle cost of the. And again, gives you more. Now we use small buses on our dial-a-ride service. We're only carrying 1 or 2 people at a time. We use small buses. It's where we carry 40 and 50 people.
So over the life of a bus, you'd have to buy 5 small buses. All of a sudden, the life cycle cost differential is gigantically lopsided towards bigger buses from an operating cost.
That's why when you go to large communities, what you see is big buses and bigger buses, basically.
Like 150,000 times 5 versus $800,000. You get it? Okay. And then, so are there any systems in the United States that do the small bus thing?
If you were to go to Astoria or to Tillamook or even down to Cay Falls, you would see smaller buses, because that's what they don't have the same number of riderships. If you go to Salem or you go to Medford, you're going to see at least the 40-foot buses, because even though they're smaller and they carry less people, that they still need that capacity on the system. So, no, unless you have a specialized service like for elderly and disabled, you usually don't use small buses.
And how does our ridership compare to other cities, same size or bigger?
We are now ranked 30th in the nation for productivity. That's number of boardings per hour. And the size of the community is 144, so we're very, very productive. And really, we carry more people per hour on our buses than TriMet does on their buses in Portland.
Their buses, not the light rail.
Not light rail, just the buses. Yeah.
And that 30th is out of 550 communities, or districts.
Buses.
So we're 30th in efficiency, but in times the size, we're 144th.
In population.
So if everybody were equal, we'd be 144th, but we're not, we're 30th.
Yes. Now, University and LCC contribute mightily to that. We carry a lot of students, and so if you look at other small college towns, they would be similar, but we carry more people than the entire system in the city of Indianapolis. So,
Thank you.
there's 1 million.
So just to, I'm going to call, I've got Andrea and Mike and George and now Betty in the second round. And I'm just going to suggest that if there are things that you need to help make the decision that you need to make, that now's the time to bring those forward so we can help get you the information that you need to get to be able to make your decision. That's what they need to take out of this meeting, because our hope is that we'll be making a decision on the preferred alternative on March 9th. So that's where we're aiming for. Mike?
Well, I don't think anyone responded directly to Councilor Brown's question about the 1113 or 13th11. And Alan kind of did. He talked about operating and capital costs. And then a third reason why someone might choose 1113 or 13th 11th is because of the trip time is better. And we know that the more rapid you make bus rapid transit, the more desirable it is, the more likely you are to attract riders. So those are three of the reasons why someone might choose that route.
Can I respond to that?
No.
I-
No.
Oh,
I'll put you in the queue if you'd like.
yes, please.
Okay. Okay, Andrea, you're next.
I don't need any more information, Mayor. I think we've been informationed, Rich. But I did want to respond to the questions about TSM. For me, I would not put forth TSM as an alternative because it doesn't do anything to take the buses off the regular routes and off the regular roads. And I don't know if that means that there will be the bigger buses or not. As time goes on, we don't have enough money to take care of the streets that we own. And with the BRT lanes, LTD is responsible for those, not the City of Eugene. So any way we can kind of help mitigate that cost, I would support. And TSM doesn't do that. TSM basically leaves the roads as they are and could possibly put bigger buses on them, which would shorten the life cycle of our roads, and I have a concern with that because we don't have enough money to take care of the roads as well as we'd like to begin with, and that was one of the comments that I had about TSM.
Thank you. Mike, you're next.
Thank you. I thought Alan's comment about those with concerns about affordability advancing a Tea Party argument was interesting. I was kind of wondering when George Brown and Betty joined the Tea Party, but
Me too.
I suppose if cost weren't a consideration, if money were no object, maybe we would be building this right down the middle of the new West Eugene Parkway, which I think might be enough to bring a majority together on this. But I'm just saying, I think money is an object with this, and I think it is a valid consideration in whether or not we go forward with this and where it puts our state and our country and where it puts us. I think that's an important consideration with this. And that's why I asked the question I did about the bond capacity of the state, and I actually didn't ask a very good question, so I appreciated the information. What I was really looking for, though, is, has the new announcement by the treasurer and the state's committee changed the environment sufficiently from previous projections as to what their new projections would be about the state's level of indebtedness? And what I'd like to have at a future point, for the purposes of decision-making, is kind of an analysis of our capacity statewide and how it affects this project, okay? And then, secondly, I was very interested to hear Andrea talk about the lanes being LTD's responsibility for maintenance. Is that true? So essentially, when we're affecting
Dedicated lanes.
Dedicated
The
lanes.
dedicated lanes.
Exactly, the dedicated portions that we're talking about, and when we're essentially acquiring property in order to be able to create those new lanes, we're essentially creating a new throughway right there, right? Interesting. And when we create that new throughway, there are at least several businesses, I would assume, where that's going to change their level of access or restrict perhaps some of those property owners' access.
So let me see if I understand what you're asking. And I can reference for certainty that the 6/7 alignment runs largely on ODOT facility. They have a process. Anytime you move a curb for any reason, it triggers their access management policy. It's not to say that driveways would have to be moved. Talking to ODOT, they indicated they'd obviously be looking to work with us to avoid that. They know what that pain more than we do to try and close driveways. So,
Right.
But that is a process that we'd have to go through for 6/7. 11th is a city facility. Our intent all along has not been to close any driveways, and our designs don't have that impact.
Would you say it's at all true, however, that there may be, through some of the process of building a brand-new throughway, as it were, in some of those areas, that you've created a limitation on access in any way?
Again, our assessment to date, traffic engineers looking at it haven't found that to be the case.
Okay.
In fact, in one case in particular, where we had a bat lane, considered removing it, the business owner asked us to go back and make sure it's there, because that bat lane will make it easier from that business owner's perspective for his customers to turn into his business.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, George Polling?
Well, I just kind of want to go back to the topic of the articulated bus. In the past few months, I've noticed an increase of the use of the articulated bus, not on a regular basis, but an increase of them on both MLK and particularly Coburg Road. Does that have to do with the amount of ridership or spare parts or extra buses, or why has that been an increase?
It's an Andy's question.
It's really about demand. We now own 15 of the standard 60-foot buses. Most of those get dedicated to university LCC routes. One of them is dedicated to Cottage Grove route, which surprises some people, but it comes in with those size loads on a lot of their trips in from Cottage Grove. But the new ones you're seeing on Coburg Road with the opening of Gateway MX, the number 12 route was truncated, so it makes the connection from Eugene Station out to the Gateway area and back, and the frequency was reduced on that as part of that whole package of service changes. So to keep the carrying capacity up, we instituted use of 60-foot buses to address that need. So that's why you're seeing them out on that route.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I really thought I had my hand up before Mike did, but I'm not as assertive. I'm not as assertive as I need to be. But I wanted to respond to Tea Party before you said it. I wanted to say that it reminds me of when people used to call everyone a communist if they happened to share some point of view with a person who's a communist. And I am not a Tea Party member, but I don't like name calling. And I think that you can't categorize people in that way. I think, well, it really is very much like when, I remember years ago when the Communist Party was more prevalent, and people would say, well, you must be a communist if you think that. And the communists had some good ideas. And I wasn't one of those either, but it could have been. And I had another comment, the 30-foot buses would be great for the South Hills. The big buses can't really go around there, and there aren't that many passengers. Well, maybe there aren't passengers because there aren't buses, but they would be great for those neighborhoods that don't have much service or sometimes any service. Thank you.
George Brown?
Thank you. Well, I just want to go back just briefly, just to make a short comment about the perceived benefits of 6th, 7th over 11th, 13th. Yes, it would cost a little bit more because you have to go a couple extra blocks from 11th down to 6th and then out and then turn on Chambers, and then you come back on 7th, you have to go back up 4 blocks to get. So you're increasing the trip time a little bit. It is going to take a little more upfront investment, and it's going to take a little bit longer, but you're delivering people where they need to go. You're delivering people to an enormous number of probably 100-plus businesses, which are also employment centers. You're delivering workers and shoppers. When you go down 13th, you're delivering people that live along the street or maybe are going to church or to an occasional event at the fairgrounds, which is worthy. But I would assume that service would stay intact if 6th or the 6th, 7th option was chosen. And yes, it would cost more money and it would take a little bit more time, but it seems like that's not the only reason that you would want to build this system, is to shave off minutes. You want to deliver people where they need to go, to the customers. And if I was going to choose either one, which I don't know what I'm going to do, honestly, yet, I personally, I think 6th and 7th makes more sense, just from a business standpoint of doing what riders want you to do, is get me to my job and get me to that business, which is what we talk about on West 11th. That is even more valid point on 6th and 7th as opposed to 13th, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Just a quick response to that. There's no doubt that the 6th, 7th alternative is a well-performing system, or part of the system. But my point is that we need to think about this system, and I believe it was Sean Bowles at a Whitaker Neighborhood Association meeting that said it's not whether we do 6th, 7th, or 13th, it's which one we do first. And for this corridor, for the technical reasons listed, that's kind of where we've come down on 13th.
Okay, thanks.
I guess I've got Alan and Pat in the queue for that. I'd just like to, there's a lot of troubling things about this conversation because it seems to go between looking for the preferred corridor or preferred route and a question about MX entirely, and it seems to go between those. And from my point of view, we decided on MX as our transit system years ago, had built and invested in 2 sizable sections of it, which has performed only well. They could have done a lot worse or not done as well and still have scored really high, but they've kind of been over the top in terms of doing exactly what we asked them to do. We're in this building this system with partners, and we've adopted it with partners, and so it's not just us, but the metro area that's in it. We're not just dealing with the ridership we have now, we're dealing with a council goal of trying to improve that ridership and reduce VMT and CO2 levels and all of that kind of thing. It meets federal, state, and local goals, so we're doing all of that. So, and I guess my question for the folks around the table is this, well, I know that we were thinking eventually of 6th and 7th and 13th all being part of the system because that's the way it was laid out with major transit corridors throughout Springfield and Eugene. If 6th and 7th is going to get more support now than 13th, then I, for one, need to know that. Because if you're going to, if you are participating in a conversation about 6th and 7th or 13th, and your goal is you're not going to vote for either one, then I don't know that that needs to be part of what I have to take in to make the decision. I need to know if around this table, the difference between those two streets makes a difference, a substantive difference in the amount of support we have for moving forward. And it's, to me, it's not about MX, it's about the preferred corridor. If you're a no-build, you're a no-build, and so that discussion ends. But if it makes a difference about your support for this project and getting it built, then which one of these alignments is chosen, then I would really like to know that sooner rather than later, because that could have an influence on how I might lean in terms of technical issues aside. So I just want to put that out there. Alan, you're next, and then Pat.
So I'm not a member of the don't spend anything on anything anywhere group. Don't spend anything on anything anywhere.
I don't think anybody is.
I understand our financial constraints that we have. They're abundantly obvious to everybody. But I think it's our responsibility to look out into the future and make those decisions about how we do land use, how we do transportation, and how they intersect, and how we grow, and make those investments in the future. That's what Envision Eugene is all about. It's about looking out into the future. And so is this. And we're supposed to make those decisions about what's best for our community. So that's how I view this decision, which is why I'm in favor of a build option. I can live with probably either one, although one's dramatically more expensive in my mind than the other in terms of build options. What happens if we do a no build? What happens to the next phase of MX? And how long would it take?
It begins to get much more difficult to go to FTA and say, please, sir, give us some more money for studying in the next corridor.
Right now, our community is known nationally for being cutting edge, and MX is part of the reason. We have people from all over the country, in fact, all over the world, coming here to study what LTD has done with MX. And I do have to think that it would have some impact on FTA if the local community said, we don't really need to, after considerable investment of time and money has already been made.
In the TDM option, which is really a no-build option, there's no funding identified for that. Where would, right?
It's essentially an operations strategy, so
But it has capital
there would be
associated with
some
it.
capital associated.
I saw a number, it was $2.5 million or something.
It would be our operating budget. We'd have to, if we did the TSM,
Yeah.
It wouldn't qualify for any of the federal funding programs, like Small Starts. We'd have to take it out of our...
There aren't any federal programs for that stuff?
Well,
Come entirely out of operations?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, it would come out of it could come out of our federal funding that we get that's flexible for those reasons. But, right now we're spending that money, for example, on preventative maintenance for our buses, so it'd be a trade-off.
So it'd come out of existing money?
Yeah.
No new pool for that kind of stuff?
Right.
Okay. One of the things I would like to see that would be helpful for me is we've gone down the road and you've listened to people and you've made all these adjustments to the project. And so I would like to see a laundry list of all those adjustments you've made and what the character is of those. And so I can judge where you were and where you are and how much movement there made and what impact that's had on the MX system on both 6th and 7th and 11th and 13th.
I can't answer that specifically with a number, but I can tell you that the staff has had over 200 individual meetings with property owners or business owners along the corridor and made considerable adjustments as a result of each of those meetings.
And we're pulling together the list you've identified, Alan, so we can get that to you soon.
Are you through, Alan?
Yes.
Okay, Pat?
So kind of like a Word document that's been edited. You've got strikeouts and insertions and
Legislative format.
Just a list would be good.
Mayor, for my part, I'm not ready to make an announcement as to where my vote lies regarding build or no build or 6th or 7th. But Andrew, you've stated that the questions have all been asked and a lot of the answers have been provided. I do have a couple more that you may not be able to answer currently, but if you can put it on your list of questions to answer. One is regarding 6th and 7th. I'm assuming that sometime in the future we'll be looking at Highway 99 route out into Bethel. And I'd just like to see how 6th and 7th route would mingle with the future Highway 99 route and what kind of adjustments would need to be made subsequent to building 6th and 7th for the West 11th route in order to facilitate the building of the Highway 99 route, which I've stated already that I'm in favor of. The second is on one of the slides we're looking at on-street parking spaces removed.
Yes.
And just a question that you most likely don't have an exact answer for me right now, but in the build-outs, can you give me a number as to how many in parking lot spaces will be removed? So spaces that are currently in a parking lot that would no longer be there.
Right,
with the build-out.
we have a number for that. I can get that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And, as far as the debate is concerned, it's a pretty lively topic in my household. And
Mine too.
Mine too.
And I don't have any debate trophies on my shelf, but each member of my family has lots of debate trophies on our shelves, including one world championship. So I tend to listen to the debate more than participate. So I'm like you, Andrew. I've heard the questions. I've heard most of the answers, and I think LTD's done a superb job of responding throughout, and including the morning that I read the headline when Mr. Pangborn had called me within moments of me almost dying of shock. No, but quickly responded, giving me the true information or the full information that wasn't completely reported in the newspaper. So LTD's done a really good job of answering the questions all along, and I anticipate that's going to continue throughout the decision-making process. Thanks.
Chris?
Thanks. Great conversation, great discussion, and for me it reinforces why I appreciate keeping both build options on the table. And I realize there is an additional cost for the 6th, 7th option, and in terms of the actual cost per boarding, it's a difference of 4 cents, which some might consider a lot and some might not. But I'm also struck by the fact that by 2031 there'd be 70,000 more riders on the 6th, 7th route, not to mention its integration into other systems. So that's why I think it's good to continue to talk about it. But for me, when you talk about the future, you're talking about the community's future, not just LTD's future. And that whatever transportation option we propose needs to fit into that future, and that's why those need to be linked. And I'm appreciative of where the conversation is going with that. But just to dwell for a moment in the here and the now, one of the concerns anyone would have, we heard about it last summer at 29th and Willamette, is if you build this, is it going to kill my business? What is the degree of disruption I would experience right here and now? And I am very concerned that LTD would be sensitive and accommodating to disruption to businesses. So if you have any experience when you were building the other routes, or if you have any notion of just what kind of disruptions we would be talking about with the mitigated routes we're currently talking about. Are driveways going to be closed? Are people not going to get to businesses? Is it going to be so bad that everybody's going to avoid, like the plague? How long would construction be in front of any given business? Those are all, I think, important questions to answer, and I would want to know what degree of interruption we would see on any one of those corridors.
Tom?
Just a quick response. We actually, and we may have handed it out as one of the many pieces of paper associated with this project, a letter from the Wildish group talking about construction impacts based on their experience, both building our first 2 MX lines, but also they were the company that widened West 11th from Garfield, added the center turn lane. And so they gave us, and we can get that again for you, a good kind of walkthrough as to how the construction process would work, how long they would be in front of various businesses. And in essence, what they said was that they try and do work in 2-week segments, 5 blocks apiece, and it's just this rolling construction. And it's on each side of the street, so, on one side it'd be there for 2 weeks, and then it'd move 5 blocks forward, and then it'd come back the other way. So that's the essence. They haven't had to close any access to any business during construction. And generally speaking, we try to provide as much support during that as we can.
So other strategies are, when necessary, to work in the middle of the night when there's less traffic. We have done that and are willing to do that. And use signage so that people know that the business is still open, and direct people into the business as, how they can get in there. So those are other strategies. We're fortunate in that we've had 2 routes worth of experience, and the contractor has as well. If they're the contractor for this, whether they are the contractor or not, we have that knowledge base that we can pass on.
Great, thank you.
So, no one else in the queue. Are there any other comments you want to make before we wrap this up today?
Basically, I guess one thing that some of you might remember, that you submitted some questions during the public hearing. We're in the process of responding to those, and we'll get you something in the near future.
I would just like to follow up on Councilor Pryor's comments. You're absolutely right. This is a regional decision. It has to be a long-range decision. It has to be a community decision. I don't think it benefits anybody for us to say what's most beneficial for us to do in the next 2 weeks or the next year. We really do need to look out, and LTD wants to be a full partner in doing that. So.
Thank you. I guess my final comment would be that, yes, this is about West Eugene, but it's about our entire community. In fact, it's about our whole metro area, and furthermore, it's about our responsibility at the state level and on up. And I just, my feeling is if we're interested in the future for 99 or anywhere else in the system, then it's important that we're thoughtful, and it's important that we think about how the decision we make this go round will affect our ability to do things we want to do in the future. So I think this is a very, very big moment for our community, and we'll take it up soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
She sounds right.